Hi everyone, my name is Anthony Palmer. I'm Group Commercial Director for Carrick. I'm joined today by Abigail Reynolds, an admitted attorney, and Paul Waal, who runs our local business. I wanted to focus today on a very specific aspect of our Carrick Consult division. Carrick Consult, as a background, looks after our fiduciary offerings, so last will and testaments, living wills, setting up, administering trusts, estate planning, etc. But often an overlooked aspect of that is our tax, our accounting, and our corporate and commercial law. So Abigail is going to talk to us today about memorandums of incorporation and shareholders agreements. I know it sounds a little bit boring, first sound, but actually is something that our business owners often neglect and regret that later on. It's a lot of simple stuff that you can put in place right at the beginning, which pays massive dividends down the line. So just as a quick background to Abigail, I think you're a very colorful person, born in India, lived in Italy, then Zimbabwe, then South Africa, sailed across the Atlantic on the Cape to Rio yacht race, studied in Argentina, and then started her professional career in South Africa at Cliff Decker Hofmeyr, then Bernard Bookish Getz, then 4 years at Investec in the M&A division. And then in 2012 started her own practice and really focusing on a very, very wide, broad aspect of corporate and commercial law. Today we're going to focus on shareholders agreements and memorandums of incorporation. I was introduced to Abigail when Carrick recently amended or updated our MOI, and I was absolutely astounded, blown away is probably a better term, as to just how basic the agreement was that we had in place. It really wasn't tailored to even come close to taking into account all the individual shareholders and directors of the business. I guess at the end of the day, everyone has their own career paths, everyone has their own objectives in life. And what Abigail did, and did extremely well, she got us all around the table. She explained all the points to us in simple English. She's got a very, very commercial brain or mind. And the end result was that we had an MOI that not only did we all understand, and there were parts that we had polar opposite views, like really, some strong debates, that Abigail managed to find that middle ground. And we walked away understanding what those points were, but also extremely importantly, we had an agreement that protected the company. And so, just with that background, Abigail, if you wouldn't mind speaking to our viewers about what is a shareholders agreement versus an MOI and some important points that need to be focused on.
Yeah. Thanks, Anthony. Hi, everyone. So just off the back, I think that an MOI or shareholders agreement, whichever ones you end up putting in place, are so extremely important. They're like the antenuptial contract that you would sign before you get married. You settle them now up front before the events have actually happened and while there's room for good debate. Then you put them in the drawer and you only need to pull them out if there's ever a dispute or one of the trigger events occurs. So I can't say enough how important I think they really are. So an MOI and a shareholders agreement, you can use both. You can use only the MOI, and there are different reasons for that. Since our New Companies Act of 2008 came into place, the MOI took on a much more important stand as being the trumping document. So if there's a conflict between it and the shareholders agreement, it trumps the shareholders agreement. And the shareholders agreement really plays a secondary role, and you can use it to record clauses that you feel are confidential. It doesn't get sent to the company's office, which we call SIP-C, so it's a private document, whereas the MOI is sent to SIP-C and anyone can pay to get a copy. So in that sense, the shareholders agreement really just deals with confidential matters, and that's all. I far prefer the MOI to be the really detailed document and to include everything if possible, because when you're trying to work out everyone's rights and roles in the company, especially for lay people, this isn't where they feel comfortable interpreting agreements. It's far better not to be having to look at two that might conflict or deal with the same matters or what. So what I want to say about why you should not use the template MOIs or very basic MOI for your company is because they really are thin on detail, and they leave out an enormous amount that we can add in that could protect you no matter whether you're a minority or majority shareholder, whether you do or don't control the number of directors that would be appointed on the board, etc. So depending on who instructs us, we can make that MOI really, really protect you to the greatest degree. And I wanted to just talk about some of the clauses that are not in the template MOIs that you would find online that we would put forward to include. So some of them are, for example, that if a shareholder wants to sell their shares, we would include that there's a preemptive right that the other shareholders get to buy a pro rata portion before an outside party does. That is surprisingly not included in our Companies Act, and that's obviously key. Another important one which favors majority shareholders is the drag along right, which means that if they find a buyer that wants to buy 100% of the shares in the company, so they're going to get a great exit, great value for the business that they've built, the minority shareholders can't refuse to sell their shares to that buyer. Because can you imagine, 75% of the shareholders want to sell and the 5% and 10% shareholders don't, and the whole deal dies and the big exit fails. Then the reverse is a come along clause, which is in favor of minority shareholders. And that says, if the majority of the shareholders, you can pick the percentage or you can name a shareholder, want to sell their shares to someone, the minority shareholder can decide if they can't afford to buy those shares themselves, that their shares must also be sold to that buyer. In other words, minority shareholder holding 5 or 10% might not want to be left a shareholder in a company with a majority shareholder they don't know or trust. So they might want to prefer to exit. And then there's things like restraint of trade and non-compete that can be recorded to apply to the shareholders, or only some of them. The important one, which we'll talk about when we talk about buy and sell, is a deemed offer of shares, that if a shareholder dies or becomes incapacitated, their shares are up for sale to other shareholders, and then at what price and how and when it's paid. Or some shareholders that got their shares only through their employment. If their employment ends, their shares are up for sale, etc. So some really, really important clauses. And then I also wanted to point out some of the default positions in the Companies Act that we can amend in the MOI. So for example, special resolution of shareholders, which is a resolution that's used to pass important matters like sale of the business or putting the company in liquidation. That can be passed at the moment if 75% of the shareholders agree, but that percentage might be too small. For example, there might be a shareholder who owns 20% but is a big funder of the business, and they might want that their approval must be sought for those matters, so we can increase that percentage to 80% or higher. We can also add a long list of important things that require shareholders' approval, so we can take those decisions away from the board of directors and give them to the shareholders, and they can include things like salaries and bonuses of senior management, hiring, firing of senior management, change of auditors, annual budgets, expenditure outside the budget, so really important things. Again, that would be important for someone who doesn't control the votes of the board, but wants to be able to block those votes as a shareholder. Things like, at the moment, under the Companies Act, a quorum of shareholders, for them to have a meeting and pass a resolution, is only 25% of them, which is far too low for almost any company. I don't know why that percentage is so low. We'd always want to bump that up, and sometimes we could also record that no meeting can even begin unless a specific shareholder or its representative is present. You can really tie up those kind of decisions. So those are just some of the things I would put to the table. And as I say, they'd be amended depending on who I represent.
Thanks, Abigail. I'm smiling because it brings back some really interesting memories of all of us sitting around the boardroom table and discussing those points. Another thing that I wanted to raise is valuations. Business or disruption and delays that come along because you haven't put a process in place and a system in place. So business valuations is something that we had to really work out a formula, how to value a business. When it's needed, I can foresee, and when we were chatting offline, 6-month plus delays just on the parties agreeing how to value a company, never mind actually getting that valuation done. And that dovetails, I think, quite nicely with what Paul's going to talk to us about today, which is buy and sell insurance and other contingent liability, etc. type insurances that need to be thought about. So Paul, maybe if you could talk to us about what you think about when you're speaking to business owners from an insurance perspective, as well as obviously the valuation aspect, which is such a critical part of that.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. And yes, you make such a good point where you talk about your experience and the experience at Carrick, on how to value the business. Everybody around a boardroom table will have their own ideas and their own history of how companies are valued. So it's always, in our opinion, a very good thing to get the planning and the structures and the valuations out of the way long in advance. Not to do it when the event takes place, because as we know, that can take 6 to 8 months just to get that in place. And if we can assume that type of valuation is already in place, then the business assurance side is where we come in after the fact. And the business assurance offers vital protection for businesses which generally have more than one owner against any number of future events that could adversely affect the continued smooth operation of the business, and also long-term the survival of that business. There are three vital areas when we look at business assurance products for our business owners. The first and probably most common one is buy and sell agreements and buy and sell insurance. So as Abigail said, the buy and sell agreement predetermines to whom an ownership share may be sold, and also usually at what price. And then the life assurance is purchased to provide the funds required by the remaining owners to buy out the share of the departing or the deceased partner. And that then avoids a whole lot of conflict and disruption to the business, and also generally frees up some capital for that transaction to take place. The second vital area is key person cover. Now, key person cover is life insurance purchased on the life of someone on who the business is dependent for its successful operation, to compensate for the loss of such a key person, or allow just simply for the replacement of that person. The third part of these three vital areas is contingent liability, also sometimes known as loan cover. And loan cover allows for the repayment of loans or credit which has previously been provided to a business subject to some sort of personal suretyship by its owners. Should one of the owners die or become disabled, that will then become available. It protects the business and also protects the estate of the deceased owner or partner against any claim. All three of these vital areas of protection have their own tax implications. They all have their own estate implications, which is something that requires detailed discussion with the business owners at the time. I have seen many previous buy and sell agreement, that have been put in place with the assurances, etc., that have been established incorrectly and would trigger all sorts of tax implications, have the wrong implication on estates because of the way in which they have been set up with regard to the relationship between the owners and the payers and the beneficiary nominations, all these types of things. I see it all the time that they are simply just put in place in the wrong way. And as I said, it's got very negative implications, specifically on estate duty calculations. So, a detailed discussion with everybody around the boardroom table, everybody understanding what it is we're trying to achieve and how to put the assurance part specifically together properly is vital, and not to rush through these things and put it all together properly.
All right, great. Abigail, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, sorry, I do. I just want to talk about some of the things that the buy and sell agreement should cover as an example that I sometimes find lacking in the templates from the insurance companies. And again, the point is to leave as little ambiguity as possible and as much clarity as possible for the eventuality. So, for example, insurance company may not pay out the policy to the parties who've taken it out, the shareholders that took out the policy, on the death of a deceased shareholder or the disability of that shareholder, if they did something wrong under the terms of that policy, such as drive drunk or take illegal substances, and that caused their death or disability. And we need to record what happens in that event. Now, the policy hasn't paid out the funds. The shareholders might not be able to afford to pay the price themselves in cash that they agreed to pay for the shares. Can the estate of the deceased shareholder demand that they pay in cash that same full price, or does the price drop to R1 because that shareholder caused the problem? If the estate refuses to sell, can the other shareholders, if they still want to buy the shares, demand the shares are sold to them again at what price or at R1, etc.? So that's a super important one. Another one is if a shareholder can't get the life insurance that's needed, do the other shareholders who would want to buy shares put aside money on a monthly basis into a fixed account, so that they start to create their own savings fund, but as I said, properly overseen, so that they can afford to buy that shareholder shares on his death or incapacity. And a dispute resolution clause dealing with mediation and arbitration to structure a quick and effective and cheaper version than if everyone has to go to court to fight about things. So there are a couple of things that I always end up amending in the standard buy and sell agreements. I'd recommend they run past an attorney. And then I want to say one more thing, that the buy and sell agreement, you need to make sure that it doesn't conflict with any of the terms recorded in an MOI or shareholders agreement, if that also talks about death and disability and when shares are sold. So if I look at a buy and sell agreement, I always check that the MOI or shareholders agreement doesn't need amendment to say that in the event of a conflict, the buy and sell agreement will trump. Because if you have the two documents dealing with the same thing, it just raises another dispute. Yeah. And in fact, the MOI would win. So, yeah.
All right, fantastic. To all our viewers, thanks very much for listening. I hope that that our point came across, that these really need to be sculpted to your individual circumstances. Paul, myself, and Abigail would be very happy to review what you've currently got in place. Take it off the shelf, dust it off, send it over to us. We can make sure that it is updated, like Abigail said, to take into account any changes in the Companies Act. And then from an insurance perspective, I do want to echo what Paul said. We have seen insurance agreements in place that have just been set up wrong from the beginning. The cover is wrong, the actual structure is wrong, and we've had to make amendments to that. So thanks all for your time. Reach out to us at www.carrick-consult.com, and we look forward to speaking to you further. Thank you very much. Abigail, Paul, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Anthony.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.